on the top.
I mean, you do have that part going for you. I think Nick and I just look like slobs. I mean, Nick, I look like a slob.
I think you guys look comfortable. I don't think you look like
comfortable. Comfortable, I guess, is the word. I don't know if it's the right word, but it's the word.
Yeah. So anyway, TV advertising, Tom. What do you think about it?
I think it works, to quote an old Nexstar advertising campaign.
So, Tom, how much, not a dig at Nick, obviously, how much do you know about what we are doing here other than, what we said about making Flowcode sound like it's being run by human people? And I guess how up to speed are you on QR and where are you in the conversation with us specifically?
Well, I guess I understand that, obviously you guys are in the business of QRs and providing those and providing analytics for those and how that can help, whether it's advertisers or local TV stations sort of, advance their product and get more analytics and all that kind of good stuff. I think, in terms of like a local television station, I would kind of look at it as, you guys would provide a service not dissimilar to something like, a Nielsen Hot Zips, where you can kind of get, anyways, I think, and we can jump into this more when we get into the conversation, but for me, you all would be providing basically a service where not only do we get an aesthetically pleasing looking QR code that's not just like the generic one you can spit out from an internet browser, but you're also offering us analytics on top of that we can, obviously it's data that we can choose to use however, but I think there's several ways from a station marketing, but also a commercial client point of view. So I haven't looked at exact packages of what you guys are offering, but I think I have the general gist of it, but and you Nick, certainly know more than me.
No pre-designated talking points or anything like that.
So the things I think we can talk about are snipe opportunities, car commercial options, uses in weather that go beyond what we know that works, the scan for the weather app, whatever, but we could talk about that specifically, I
think
go ahead.
And I think for me, the big thing is I was just going to kind of talk about how QRs are, one, they're data collection and analytics. Two, from a news point of view, it's a way to get out information quickly and drive people to the information you want. I could use an example of we had a vaccine page. So, when vaccines weren't readily available, you could go figure out if you could, where you could, all that kind of stuff. But that timely information you can drive people to. And then, the next point too, I think you're just seeing them more and more in commercials. And Nick and I were on the phone the other night and I was watching a boxing match that was the free undercard before the actual pay-per-view, and they pop up a pay-per-view saying, purchase this pay-per-view now. So I just think there's a lot of different ways to drive people. And I also think that the interesting thing is local TV traditionally is they lag on, we lag on adopting new technologies. And I think this is one that can really help what we're doing and make it easier. And I think the easy argument there is that QRs are everywhere. People, and especially with the pandemic, you go to a restaurant, lots of times you're not handed a paper menu anymore, you're scanning it and ordering via that way. So I just think the argument of, well, people aren't going to do that is just, it's null and void now, because everyone knows how to scan a QR and your phone makes it so easy. You just point your rectangle at a thing and it happens, right? You don't really have to do much more than that.
What do you mean rectangle? Tom,
I feel are you
explain rectangles.
Yeah.
Explain rectangles?
Yeah.
Well,
because it's smart.
we have like the little rectangle we carry around, and then we have the big rectangle that sits in our living room. So like, when I think like, from a TV marketer perspective, everyone's on the little rectangle, which is a phone, which I can't pick up because that's what's showing
how
you
you
right now.
record. I'll do it for
Yeah.
you.
That's the little rectangle that we're
Now we
all
have
on,
Santa.
and we're tethered to 24 hours a day. So like, from a TV marketer point of view, my job and all of our jobs really are to force you from that rectangle, the small one, to the big rectangle, and to get you there. So again, QRs are a way to integrate that. It's also like, a way to serve content in a non-traditional way. Like, Nick and I were just talking about like proof of brand and proof of performance spots, and like, you can put a QR in there, and you can also use that. It's kind of an informal poll of, your viewers, what kind of stories do you want to see? Well, if I'm saying, hey, check out this cool story we did last week, scan here to get the whole story. And, I know story A got a ton of scans, but story B didn't get quite as many, that becomes a tool that you can use in a newsroom for like story selection. You can say like, look, our viewer base is hungry for this type of news. And also it just helps me too, when I'm marketing to that viewer, this is the type of story that appeals to them. So how can we play off that? And then to Nick's point too, something like weather, you have it's like HubZip. You can see where you have pockets of viewers, and that can help you serve content better than you were before, right? Because you're getting like real-time information, and it's constant, and it's going, and it's not like, once a month or 4 times a year that you're getting that information. You're getting that information, you can get it daily, hourly, whatever. It's really up to you. So yeah.
I should pause this for half of 1 second. It'll be fun to edit this because this is what'll go at the front. But Tom, meet Megan. She's the director of sales for Flowcode TV. Megan, meet Tam Wegmann. He's the creative director at CBS 58 in Milwaukee, which is DMA.
We're neighbors, kind of.
DMA,
Chicago?
Chicago, yeah.
Gotcha. Short drive down I-94.
I know.
DMA
Love and see ya.
36, I believe.
Nice.
What'd you say?
So DMA 36 that Tom is hanging out in. And my name's Nick, and I work at Flowcode.
Well, now that
Good.
that's over.
Now,
We're really good at this podcasting thing.
big rectangle, little rectangle, Tom, maybe the thing that becomes like what made you famous.
Just talking about
I
rectangle.
know, we might trademark that.
Yeah.
You.
Well, hey, I'm down. I also think like, when we're talking about rectangles, my other spiel on rectangles is like, attention spans like are the expectation for the viewer, for the consumer, whatever, is different on each rectangle. So on the little rectangle, you want something snappy, quick, easily digestible. Hey, that was great, I'm moving on. On the big rectangle, that's where you sit and you binge watch, and your attention span expands exponentially, basically, because again, you're still going to sit in front of that big rectangle. That's why, things like Tiger King are popular, because you're going to sit there and just keep going. Whereas like, the trailer on the little rectangle you see that's a minute long or whatever gets you to the big rectangle to be like, whoa, that was a minute of crazy. Give me 6 hours of crazy to watch all back to back. And so I think that's important too, from like a news point of view, is that compelling storytelling and things like that are always going to work on the big rectangle. The little rectangle, though, that's the interesting part now, especially for a TV marketer, because you never really had this, and like we've had this opportunity for a while, so it's not like 2022 is like the first time we've had this opportunity, but you're able to reach a lot more people all day long, constantly, on your phone than you ever were before. I mean, you would write a topical, it would play in your lead in, and people who are watching your lead in would see your topical. You had a limited audience to try to entice. Now, you know, you can reach a wide sector of your DMA at any given time, the right Facebook post or whatever. And you can also drag them from big rectangle back to the little one to check out what you want.
So I think that's been the hard one though. Like getting them from small rectangle to big rectangle, they just needed to know where it was and they could go find it. In like the, you know, if we're imagining that the big rectangle is easy to find and they're selecting their service, is not like a live programming thing. But you know, if you wanted to get them from the big rectangle to the little rectangle, using your words, you've had to type in a phone number or type in a website. And we have really unreliable ways of measuring the effectiveness of that. And that's what I think is so cool, is that it's so hard to go from big rectangle to little rectangle until now. And Megan, I think you've seen some of that success in your previous roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's all about shortening the distance, right? And you know, I think the QR on TV conversation came up kind of out of necessity for that, like closing the loop, driving people from one ecosystem to the other and kind of measuring it. But, you know, what's really interesting is, and I think that this is where this is a super fun conversation and where I want to like talk about it, is like, people know how to use QR codes. We've seen that. And people respond to QR codes. We've seen that. One of the really big and interesting conversations that we have right now is around the idea of giving up creative real estate for QR codes. And I think the big pushbacks are A, that they're ugly, and B, like, will people even scan them? And obviously we know that people do, but like, I'm so curious about your thoughts on creative integration of QR, and like, from your standpoint, as somebody who creates video creative that's designed to be viewed by people, what are your thoughts about, like, is that something that, like, in your head, is the utility of QR more valuable than the
aesthetics of a QR?
Yeah, like, what are your thoughts about that, and how important is it?
Well, and like, so I think, like, for me anyways, that at the end of the day, like, it's, you can have a pretty spot, but if it doesn't achieve what you want it to achieve, it wasn't successful, no matter how pretty and how much you like, you know, that cool transition you put in. It's just, you know, in some things, like if you're making a film or something, like, you know, you're just kind of like, it has to be this way, I want it to be this pretty and everything, and that's fine, because at the end of the day, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder for something like that. For something like what we're doing, it's definitely function over form sometimes, and I really think the end result is what matters. And I think there's ways to do it interestingly too. I mean, like, again, Super Bowl commercials, we all remember the QR bouncing around the screen, and like, there's a lot of issues with that spot, but I will say that's a spot that makes people take notice and say, hey, what is that? And you're at least like captivated for that. And again, like I said, there's a lot of issues with that. But I will say this, like, it was disruption in the perfect way, and might not have been the prettiest spot in the Super Bowl, but it was probably one of the most talked about spots.
I'd argue it was the best spot, but that's an argument.
Well, and I think that's a fair argument, because you know, that spot achieved what it wanted to achieve. You know, and I also think that, like, that element of disruption is big. So I think a QR, especially in like a news promo now, is a little bit of a visual disruption just to see it, because you're like, hey, what's that? But I do, to your point, I think the utility of it outweighs the aesthetics, because we're still trying to get results on what we're making. And, you know, that's a way to get your result and measure it. And I think a QR needs to go in absolutely every promo we produce from now until the end of time? No, absolutely not. And I think there's definitely spots where it doesn't make sense, but there's definitely things where it absolutely makes sense, like the POBs, like I'm talking about, a weather app spot, where you're trying to get people to download and you want to drive them there. And also, like you said, remove steps and make it easy as possible. So like, we've removed walls now where it's just, you don't have to remember a website. You don't have to go to the app store and type in CBS 58 or whatever. It all does it for you. And like, so I think also like just the aesthetic is like something that people will become more accustomed to. And, again, they'll get prettier as time goes on, but they will still, be kind of a dot matrix of a weird pattern. But the same way, like during the pandemic, like, in 2019, if you were pitching like a lead package at 10 and you said, well, all I have is like cell phone video of myself in my house and 2 Zoom interviews, like people would have been like, we can't put that on TV. That's not good enough. Like, that quality isn't good enough. But I mean, obviously that has completely changed now by 2022, and that's kind of an expectation almost for your viewer you're going to see some iPhone video, you're going to see some Zoom interviews. Whereas before, like, the last thing you would want to do ever is put like a Skype or a Zoom interview. You had to be in the room with that person, and that expectation changed. And I think it's the same thing with QRs. You're just going to start seeing QRs everywhere, and they're just going to become part of it, and like an expectation of, yeah, there's a QR there. So that's kind of how I see that too, of like, aesthetically, it'll just become part of the aesthetic at some point, and it'll just be something that it's just there, and people don't really, notice that as a huge hindrance, or geez, look at that big giant ugly thing.
So like Flowcode is solved for a lot of the aesthetic, but you still need real estate for this, the code if it's going to go up. Like in another life, when I would go station to station talking about marketing and stuff, I would invoke Ogilvy. I'd say, David Ogilvy said, if we know by, if research says people can read black text on a white background better than any other thing, you can convince me an artistic reason to make it not the easiest thing for a viewer to read. But if your reason is just art and doesn't fix the problem that it's solving, like the most legible version of what you're trying to say is what you want to put in front of them. I see this as an extension, and that there are ways to make it pretty, but you want people to interact.
So as an industry, like media, advertising, whatever, we're kind of moving away from the ability to like buy or rent our audiences via, third party data collection, right? Because that's sunsetting fairly soon. And the idea there is like, okay, well, now we have to default back to kind of like, I don't know, like the original principles. Like, how do you actually attract an audience with that storytelling, and how do you surprise and delight and all of this? And I don't know, I feel like every creative person I've ever talked to has been so meticulous about, how are you representing the brand on air? Is everything consistent? Like that is like one of the biggest things that we've come across is this really specific attention to detail. And I think what's really interesting is that, like, I don't know, does Flowcode contribute to that by being just generally aesthetically pleasing? Like, I feel like, I don't know, shouldn't your QR and post scan experience have to work as hard as the message does? Why not?
Well, yeah, and I think like
I unmuted to sneeze apparently.
What I was going to say is I think the QR becomes like almost like part of your brand, because you're going to see it in newscasts and you're going to see it in promos and stuff. And so as long as you can make that scan worth it, it can totally like become part of your brand. And another like point of just like, like we antagonize over like a 15-second script. And like with something like where you're trying to show like, hey, look at the story we did, that was pretty cool, check it out. Like, it's a way to, you still have to abide by the 30, 15, 60, 20, 10, whatever on air, but you can also give that viewer a lot more, because you can also, instead of just trying to tell them in 30 seconds, this is what we're trying to do, you can give them whole stories and say, this is what we are doing. So like, to me, like, I think too, like the audience, and I think when we talk about big and little rectangles, I think, again, like teasing and like being like, well, geez, come back for more. Like on the little rectangle, it doesn't always work. Like,
Yeah.
So being able to give them bigger chunks of whatever you're wanting to serve them will work. And like,
Hold on.
again,
Tom.
yes.
What is so you have like you have to straddle two different things. One of them is station branding and initiatives, like you're talking about promotion and like doing topicals. A lot of times there isn't a reason to get them to little rectangle from the topicals, but
Right.
like, let's think of it, on the other side, not on the station brand side, but like, what'll this do for lawyers who just want to connect? Like, and you have dealt with, I mean, you've worked in 5 big markets that I can think of. I mean, that's just that I can think of. But
Just that Nick can think. Imagine how many is.
imagine it, someone like Megan might be able to think. No, but the point I make, like, how does this help? Just, I mean, some of the conversations in that lawyer plumber zone. I don't know. What are your thoughts there? I'm not saying have you solved for this problem. I'm just asking if you have thoughts.
Well, right. And to me, like, I think in terms of like an advertiser snipe or something, like you can really like use this data to say, here's where, you're going to see customers who, might want to order a pizza at this time. So a pizza place can run a snipe, make it easier. But like lawyers who are constantly, local lawyers have constant battles. Well, and every lawyer is local, but whatever. Lawyers have constant battles about trying to get the most memorable phone number. So like Nick, like we've talked about, there's Jeff Davis, I believe is his name, in San Antonio. Call the fours. His number is like 444-4444. Easy to remember. But is it easy? It's probably easier to just point your phone at something and take you right there, and then you have some sort of an online chat set up for your website. So again, it's taking a wall and removing it. You don't have to remember the fours. You can just scan this QR code. And so I think like for that, and also for like plumbers, whoever, it's a powerful tool when you're sitting at home and you hear that deal for, Windows book, this week, and you're going to save $2,000. You can just scan and get that process started right from your couch, right? So, I mean, that for a local business, I mean, how valuable is that to like just say you can sit on your couch and we can get this started for you. You don't have to call a number. You don't have to come in, again, like another guy I think that would probably jump all over this is Nick. Like, think of a guy like Tundraland. He's always trying to say, he's always got a gift card or some sort of special.
Uh-huh.
If you do that and say, get $100 gift card, if you scan this now, boom. I mean, that's going to elicit people to, what better call to action is, here's free stuff.
Boom, roasted.
Exactly. Boom, scan.
Can we talk about really quickly, like, just so it's obvious. So like you obviously, like Nick said, you work on both sides of it. You have the station branding, you have the advertisers, you obviously have the experience to have put a lot of creative out into the world, right? And up until now, I've kind of had a pretty good feeling about the performance of that creative. Let's talk about, for lack of a better phrase, like calling your baby ugly. Like, what happens when you put creative out in the world and it doesn't get scans? Like, what is from the standpoint, because I think that that's like a really big thing too, right? It's like what happens when, you know, people find out that their traditional media is A, not being watched, B, doesn't have a strong call to action, C, whatever any of those variables are. Like, as a creative person, like, would that keep you up at night?
I mean, yeah, in a way. I mean, for me, I look at it like, okay, this didn't work. Well, break it down. Let's try to figure out why it didn't work, and then we rebuild it better. And I think too, like, just in terms of like calling your baby ugly, I think like you can't look at every piece of creative either as your child. I think you're doomed to be constantly in your own head and just going crazy, because again, like I said earlier, it's for some, I mean, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. When you're just saying, oh, I don't like that spot, it doesn't look good. If we're looking at, well, no one scanned it, so it must actually be ugly. You know, I think you also have to be honest with yourself too. I mean, if what we're trying to do is get people to scan and your spot didn't scan, you gotta
do it again,
tear it down and rebuild it better. And you know, that's sort of the beauty and the madness of TV promotion and advertising, is that like you're going to pump a lot out and not all of it is going to work. That is an inevitability. I mean, if there's a producer out there that has had 100% success rate, please send me your resume. I have a job for you 100%. But yeah, I just think, again, you got to just go back to the drawing board and get back up and try something different.
I think though there's got to be like some room there. I think we act like marketing because we're talking about Flowcode solves a problem. It has better scanning codes than a normal QR code than you would just download off the internet, like you were saying, Tom. But like on top of it, I just lost exactly what I was going to say.
That has to stay.
What's that?
I said that has to stay.
You had a bleep in the last episode too. So
I
like
did.
we're gonna start a swear jar and it's gonna be all Nick. Really.
Okay. I'm all right with that. So we make, Flowcode makes more readable, safer QR codes that can be scanned on TV better than any other QR code. But what if we're looking, I mean, the QR code is just a vehicle for the marketing, and the marketing, the idea behind the spot and the plan has to be, one, marketing's not a, like you said, Tom, 100% solution in any way. It's put a message out, what's the reaction, adjust the message, put the message out. And I think this lets you do that better because it removes all these barriers. So I think, Megan, if Tom and Mick, Tom, I know you act like your spots are your kids a little bit because you have creative pride. Sure. And I think it's just about saying, oh, it's okay that some of them don't do the best. We can just change the creative and adjust, and we have a better A/B test now than we did before.
Well, right. And I think you have instant feedback, and that can be, again, like it can be a double-edged sword where it's great because you're getting this instant feedback, and also scary because you're getting this instant feedback. So you're going to know, hey, this didn't work or this did work. But like, I also think that like in any industry, but especially like when you're making creative, like you can really get into this inside baseball sort of place where you're making spots for like yourself, where you're making spots for like your colleagues, but you're not making spots for your viewers.
I mean, it straightens out more of the methodology. Like, we know the QR codes work. Megan, we've got proof. We know that the QR codes work. The Super Bowl is proof that you can do a whole spot based around them. So we have the proof, right? Like,
right. Well, and I mean, again, like that's a double-edged sword, because yes, you're gonna know that didn't work or that did work, or have a better gauge. I mean, obviously there might be people who love that, but they just didn't scan for whatever reason. Loved your spot or your commercial, but feedback is good, and feedback can drive you to make better spots. And I think that's really what I tell my producers all the time, is that like we are in a industry a field where we have to always be improving and always getting better, and there's really no end game to that. So, you know, the next spot you produce should be better than the last spot you produce, and a QR can help you do that, and, you know, with a little bit more analytics. Again,
hold on, a little bit more.
A
A little bit more.
sorry, with a lot more analytics. All right, cut. Should I go back?
No, you're
But, I mean, again, like, you know, because Nick, you know this too, like, look at the creative you made in like 2009 versus the creative you make today. I mean, like, you know, I'm sure there's spots I did in 2009 I would without a doubt be, I would say slightly embarrassed by, but I think I'm giving myself too much credit, and I would definitely be embarrassed by some spots I produced in 2009. Does that mean they were terrible spots then? Maybe, maybe not, but I do know that you got to keep getting better, and a QR is a driver that can get you to making a better spot that's more receptive to your viewers. Because again, you can always sit here and make a spot that you think looks great, but
My question was going to be, so let's say that we give every local news station in America, this might be like too much of a big question for us to wrap on, but a thought. We give every local TV station in America a QR code. We'll say Flowcode because we're
we work
manifesting.
at Flowcode.
Yeah, and we're manifesting.
Okay.
What do we learn about like the local TV audience? Like what changes about the way local TV operates based on the fact that suddenly every viewer is scanning? Like what would you imagine would be the first thing to go?
We know if it
to
worked or not.
me,
What'd you say?
We know if it worked or not. We know if a spot was successful or not. That's just my opinion. I'm recapping all of the things we already know. Tom, what do you think?
I think we would probably find that well, yeah, if our spot works, but I think we would also really be able to find like when viewers are watching. And to me, it feels like we would learn our viewer base is probably older than we think it is, which might rethink the way that we frame a newscast or something.
That's interesting.
Anyway.
You think it's older?
Yes, I
I
think
think
so.
we'd skew older than like so you
I
think we're
think-
missing what are the zones do you think?
I think like local television audiences are very much 35 to 64. And I think that 25 to 35, which obviously is going to become a very important demographic. And even, I mean, I'd even break that down to 20 to 35. Like, you know, I see like there's parallels you can draw between like this industry and the newspaper industry of like, and newspaper has out of necessity changed the way they do things because, you know, Nick, you and I have said this and talked about this before, but like the newspaper, when things were changing, they were like, well, everybody's going to turn 35 or whatever, and then they'll want a paper in their driveway. And it didn't work. And like, I think a lot of that, you could draw a parallel between like, look at a newscast from 1996 and look at a newscast from now. And I think it looks pretty similar. The 3D animations look cleaner, but like without a doubt.
Great job.
There's less digital juice involved, but the end
That's a deep
of
cut.
how
That's a deep cut. There's less
that is
digital
the
juice
digital
involved.
juice is very much. I talked about inside baseball. That was like about as inside baseball as you can get.
So it looks
I might
prettier,
be-
but
Yeah, it looks prettier, but it's still, you know, a guy talking to you, and then we cut to video with this, you know, and again, it's kind of headlines, and I think we need to learn how to make a newscast interesting to a 25-year-old. And I mean, again, I think that's the big rhetorical question for me overall in local television is that like I don't want to be the newspaper where we sit here and we keep doing the same thing over and over, even though it becomes less successful as time goes on. Because there's also signs like, you know, when big things happen, when like say, you know, you're like a big thing like Russia and Ukraine right now, right? If that all goes down, people will go to the big rectangle after they've gotten served a little bit on the little rectangle. So there's still like signs of like, you know, the traditional model works. But I do think, you know, you have to snag that younger viewer differently. And I just don't think me sitting here with an over-the-shoulder graphic like I've always done is going to do it. I think we, you know, like it just, you have to, at some point you have to just, and it can come in baby steps, you know, it doesn't have to happen tomorrow, but you have to start thinking about that younger demographic, because I really think, and this is, you know, something maybe that QR could back up for me, but I think, you know, Flowcode could back up for me, but I think that, yeah, I think we have an aging viewership and we're lacking on bringing in younger people. And
I know a few group heads who would be really excited about the idea that you could attract or be more relevant to 20 to 35-year-olds.
Mhm. And I mean, can confirm, you know, from a station perspective, Chicago, you know, going online and looking at the Google Analytics for the station before we were using QR, that, you know, basically under anything under the age of 35 was super, super low. And then after using QR, we suddenly were getting spikes of users that were falling into that category, which to me said, oh, that's interesting. We have young viewers who otherwise are not completing the action from TV viewership, from big rectangle to little rectangle, but they're there. And so like, that's like the interesting thing is how do we find and replicate more of those? But interestingly, we also had the like over 65s we're scanning through too. So it feels like QR is very universal, I guess, in terms of like people knowing how to use it. And Flowcode, I think, is aesthetically pleasing enough to be like, you know, it makes sense in the environment, but it's definitely really interesting, you know, definitely a leading question, I think, of like, you give every station a QR code and what do you learn? I mean, I think we learn about our audiences, but like, you know.
Here's the challenge. Here's the challenge. Megan, it's a genius idea. Tom, you're making the point that it's possible and can work everywhere. Let's just, every weather person, go download a Flowcode, put it on TV, link it to your app, and tell the viewer that they need to get your app. Tell them why they want to get it. Tell them what the pluses and the minuses are, how much you're updating it. But then proof. Like if you don't believe the Super Bowl and the 21 million people who scanned, and you don't believe the 100+ person business that's devoted to making pretty QR codes that work better and are compliant, you don't need to believe us. Just go try it with your weather person, because hands down, every time I've seen it tried, it works.
I am willing to take that even a step further. I feel like if you are a local weather person and you want a free custom Flowcode to like do it for real, I'll even entertain that. Don't tell Jim.
We won't tell them. This has been a long interview and we have to assume that they get to the end of this. But
right.
I'll tell you right now, Tom, your weather guy calls us. You get a code.
Free code.
Drew Burgoyne will be calling you. Yeah, actually just send it to me and I'll just put it on his graphics and that'll be that.
We're cutting to the thick of it.
We talked about removing walls, guys, so we'll just remove this wall too and I'll just put it on there. Like he doesn't even need to call you, just send it to me.
Let me see. So basically what you're saying here is that the creative services director holds all the keys, is what you're saying here. Maybe
not all of them, but in terms
more than anyone realizes. You want to get something done, you call a creative services director.
The guy.
That's right, exactly. I'll take it.
All right, I think we have our endpoint, guys.
Do we have a
Tom,
podcast?
This is very cool. Thank you for coming and doing this.
Is the need to like earn viewership and how. Sorry.
What?
Was that Zool?
I don't know. What was that?
Zool from the Ghostbusters.
That's not the end of the game. What was that?
What the what?
The ghost.
What's happening?
Did you just send Zool here?
He's there.
Um,
Ew, my palms just got sweaty. That
My
like
That
favorite
was
is
really
that there's
weird,
now a
but-
Zool runner in this.
Yeah, exactly. Nick, you're next. and
Yeah,
you're
Nick's
first. So
next.
It's probably gonna be way worse for you because, like, you know, bad things. I'm also totally down to get that free Flowcode for weather. It was not a joke. Totally.
We'll
down.
give it to you. That's
Uh,
no
got it.
problem.